Nathan Joseph Villagomez Pete was born on February 12, 1982, in the village of Tamuning on the west coast of the island of Guam, which belongs to the United States of America. Tamuning is the economic center of Guam, the largest paradise island in Micronesia, located in the Pacific Ocean. The island is quite small, and the population does not exceed 170,000. The main source of income for the island is tourism, with many people flying there each year to enjoy the clean beaches and visit the historical sites preserved from the Spanish colonial era. Nathan belonged to a large and loving family. He was the fourth child, and in total, there were 5 children: Matthew, Anthony, Eric, Nathan himself, and Selah. Their parents were Carmelita Villagomez and Mateo Pete. From birth, Nathan was a wonderful child who never caused any trouble. He grew up loving and kind, was a good student, and very curious. Nathan always respected his teachers, usually sat in the front row, and never missed a lesson. Nathan was a typical islander. From a young age, he was inseparably connected to the sea, spending time on the beach, surfing, or just enjoying the sun. As Nathan grew older, he became more popular, people loved him, and he managed to build a large circle of friends in his hometown. Nathan was known for his sense of humor, always laughed contagiously, and showed with every cell of his body how much he loved life. After finishing elementary school, Nathan attended South High School in the neighboring town of Santa Rita, where he met Michelle and Chaka, a girl who had 3 siblings, Melissa, Melania, and Anthony Chacker. This family was also friendly and loving. After meeting as teenagers, Nathan and Michelle never separated again. They studied together, supported each other in everything, and it was not surprising that their friendship eventually turned into a love relationship. When Michelle was 16, her mother fell seriously ill and Deborah was flown off the island, but unfortunately, she could not be saved. The woman died far from her family, and her children could not say goodbye to her. Facing the unexpected death of their mother, Michelle's older sister Melissa took on the role of mother and helped raise her siblings. From day one, Michelle was a great support and very helpful around the house and with the upbringing of the young ones. During this process, Nathan was always by the side of his beloved girl. In 2000, after they both completed their studies, Nathan proposed to her. Since they had no money for a wedding, they decided to just move in together and start a life together. They were so in love that they couldn't wait to start building their own house. At that time, Nathan worked as a receptionist in a hotel, but with his salary, they could not cover all expenses in a month, and they were about to give birth to their first child, whom they later named Duh. Now that he was a father, he wanted to provide his family with everything they needed. This desire eventually led to Nathan's decision to become a soldier and join the Air Force. Nathan completed his training in 2003 and was immediately sent to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, the most populous city in Alaska, in the northwest of the United States. Nathan left his home island, but now the family had a lot of money, which allowed him to build a new house where their second child, a daughter named Niara, was born in 2006. 6 years after their engagement, Michelle and Nathan could finally celebrate the wedding they had dreamed of for so long. That same year, Nathan was transferred to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where he served as team leader of the weapons team for the A-10 Thunderbolt and the 358th Squadron. There he also received training in logistics and material management, which led to a promotion and new tasks in 2007. At the end of 2007, Nathan moved with his wife and their 2 children to Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas, Nevada. At this base, he rose from Staff Chief of the 99th Logistics Squadron to Deputy Non-Commissioned Officer in charge of the Supply Department for maintaining fighter jets. Soon, the family had 2 more children, first Dran and then Devon. In 2009, Michelle considered Las Vegas the perfect place to stay and raise their children there permanently. For this reason, Nathan used his savings to make a down payment on a beautiful 730 square meter house in a quiet and pleasant suburb about 50 kilometers from the Air Regiment. At that time, Michelle was only a housewife, and the income of Sergeant Naon was not enough to provide the family with a luxurious life, although they could cover all expenses. The two were ambitious and over time spent more than they earned, which soon led to financial difficulties that severely affected their marital happiness. In mid-2009, Nathan decided to participate in the war between the USA and Iraq. Originally, the young man was supposed to spend only 6 months there, but eventually, he decided to continue his service after realizing that he was benefiting his country and his salary was significantly higher. Michelle, in turn, took a part-time job at a credit card telemarketing company during this time. Michelle did this not only to have more money but also to alleviate her anxiety about the fact that her husband was in a war zone and something terrible could happen to him at any moment, leaving her and their 4 children on their own. In addition to her new job, Michelle enrolled in a cosmetics school, hoping to become a professional beautician and open her own business. But as soon as Nathan left for Iraq, Michelle had a secret lover. She felt that the youthful love between her and her husband was no longer there and entered into a relationship with a colleague named Michael Rudolph Rodriguez. He was 31 years old at the time and had short prison sentences in 2007 and 2008 for forgery and attempted theft. He was an incorrigible womanizer who loved to seduce women, for which he even received the nickname Soft Rick. Michelle could not resist the passion and male attention of this man and plunged headlong into this dangerous relationship. When Nathan returned from Iraq at the end of 2009, it seemed as if their marriage had withstood the distance and their togetherness had become even stronger. However, this was not the case. Michelle played the role of the loving wife in a despicable way and dreamed of starting a new life with her lover. At the same time, Nathan knew nothing about his wife's infidelity and devoted himself entirely to the well-being of the family. For this reason, the 20-year-old non-commissioned officer took a night shift job to earn twice as much and provide for his wife and the 4 children, who were then between 2 and 9 years old. At the same time, the man began coaching a team of children aged 5 to 7, teaching them a simplified version of the sport of baseball. Although Michelle no longer wanted to be with Nathan, she did not try to leave him. She knew that in the event of a divorce, she would be left with nothing, and she also knew that in the event of her husband's death, she would receive $400,000 from the U.S. Army. Moreover, Nathan's life was insured under a policy for $250,000, and this knowledge led Michelle to the terrible plan to take her husband's life. In October 2010, Michelle and her lover began developing a strategy to execute their plan. At that time, they enlisted the help of Corey Alexis Hawkins, a friend of Michael's, a 30-year-old contract killer with 9 previous convictions in his criminal record. These convictions included burglary and auto theft in 1995, serious theft in 1996, deadly burglary in 2000, and fraudulent use of a credit card in 2000. Corey was an experienced criminal and offered his services as a contract killer to Michelle and Michael, for which he demanded $20,000, and the couple agreed. Later, Corey's girlfriend, the 30-year-old Jessica, joined the plan. The planned murder was to shoot Nathan in his Chevy Tahoe and then drive the car with the body to the parking lot of the apartment complex, cover the car with a blanket, and bury the body. Jessica set out to buy the special items they needed to execute the crime, including men's gloves, a blanket for the car, and a strong perfume to cover the smell of the decomposing body. The next step was to find an alibi for Michael. For this purpose, she approached her friend Shannon, a former erotic actress, to ask her to testify in court to corroborate the criminal's statements about Michael's whereabouts on the day of the crime. In return, Jessica promised Shannon 5% of the money that she and her boyfriend would receive from Michael. On Thanksgiving Day in November 2010, Nathan and his family were visited by his brother Eric and his fiancée Veronica. On that day, The guests sensed the tensions between the couple, which until then had been considered perfect. For Veronica and Eric, it was quite obvious that the love and understanding between Michelle and Nathan had completely disappeared. They barely tolerated each other and obviously had financial problems since their pantry and refrigerator were almost empty. It was Wednesday, December 1st, 2010. Michelle went to her cosmetics school after work, from where she came home at 10 p.m., only 5 minutes before Nathan was supposed to leave for the Air Force Base. But that day, everything was a little different. Michelle reported that she was not feeling well, so she left work and went straight home around 5:30 p.m. When she got home, she saw her husband sleeping on the couch. Michelle woke Nathan up and suggested that they sleep together in bed for a while, which they did. For some reason, Nathan's alarm clock did not ring, and he only woke up at 11 p.m., shocked. He immediately went to take a shower and then to the garage to put on his uniform. When he was done with his preparations, it was 11:30 p.m., and he should have been halfway to work by then. At about the same time, Michelle texted her lover to inform him about everything her husband was doing. They decided to carry out their plan that same day. At that time, Michael and Corey were sitting in a black Cadillac parked directly in front of their future victim's house, waiting for Nathan. The perpetrators were already wearing blue latex gloves on their hands so that their fingerprints could not be traced. Finally, Nathan said goodbye to his family and prepared to leave the garage. At the same moment, Michelle texted Michael about the completion of a planned deal with a client named F. Dyke, which was obviously a codename. While Nathan was still in the garage, Michael approached him from behind and shot him 5 times in the back. Although the man was mortally wounded, he found the strength to enter the house, but as soon as he did, he fell dead in front of his wife and children, who were very frightened by the sound of the shots and the fact that their father was bleeding to death in front of their eyes. Michelle immediately called emergency services, screaming that her husband was bleeding to death. The paramedic instructed the woman on how to revive Nathan, but it was too late for him. Nathan was immediately taken to the hospital, where the doctors did everything in their power to save him, but unfortunately, the man was unable to survive his injuries. The most severe wound was caused by a bullet that hit him in the neck. Michelle was hysterical as her husband was taken to the hospital and looked completely devastated when she learned of his death. Of course, it was all just an act, because just a few hours later, she sent her lover a text message with a smiling smiley face. The perpetrators, in turn, went to a previously agreed-upon apartment after the attack, where they used the fireplace to burn their clothes and destroy the evidence. Michael then went with Shannon to a hotel to confirm his alibi, while Jessica, in the meantime, thoroughly cleaned the room to destroy all the evidence. The employees of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department were shocked by the brutality of the crime that had occurred in a quiet suburb. When investigator Todd Williams arrived at the scene, he found that the garage doors were not locked. There was a lot of blood inside, with stains around the bench where Nathan had put on his shoes, as well as on several doors of his car, on the floor, and on the walls of the garage. Moreover, a bloody military uniform was found on the floor near the spot where the victim's keys and wallet were found. All this ruled out the idea of a botched robbery. Michelle was then asked to tell what had happened that day. The woman told the investigator that she had heard loud noises when her husband rushed into the garage. At that time, she did not realize what had happened because she and her children were frightened. A little later, a stumbling Nathan entered the house and collapsed in front of them, bleeding. During the conversation, Michelle admitted that they were in financial difficulties, so the investigators wondered whether Nathan was hiding a secret, such as a gambling addiction, the threat of an extortionist, or an affair with another woman, which could explain why someone would want to take the life of a model soldier. Eventually, the evidence suggested that someone had waited for the right moment before he went to work. It did not look like a random robbery. An examination of the man's phone, however, revealed no clues or evidence. All that could be found on the phone were pictures of his wife and children. In Guam, his parents boarded the first flight out of Las Vegas, full of grief. Carmelita cried throughout the flight. When they finally reached the city, Michelle threw herself into the arms of her mother-in-law and fainted, but the woman immediately sensed that her reaction was fake. Meanwhile, the two men continued to destroy possible evidence. They destroyed the phones of all those involved in the crime, including Shannon, and reminded her that she had to confirm Michael's alibi in court. The investigation continued, and the investigators questioned neighbors who had been nearby at the time of the crime. Several of them reported that they had seen a man in a brown hoodie quickly leaving the scene of the crime in a black car after the shots were fired. When the investigators asked Michelle about the car, she suddenly mentioned that her colleague Michael had a similar car. The police decided to pay attention to this and looked into Michael's file, finding out that he had an extensive criminal past. This made the police suspicious, so they invited the man for questioning. Michael agreed and answered all the questions there. He told a story that he had come up with his accomplices. Allegedly, he had gone shopping at the supermarket that day and had met a woman named Shannon around 9 p.m. According to Michael's statements, they talked for a long time, and when they felt attracted to each other, they decided to go to a hotel to have sex. The man added that they arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m., and the woman later confirmed his statements. However, the investigators felt that something was not right here, so they examined the data from Michael's and Michelle's phones and found their correspondence, which they had also been leading for a year. In a report from the phone company, they were able to find exactly the messages they had exchanged on the evening of the tragedy. Michael wrote that he hoped for a quick conclusion of the contract with Van Dyke, which was supposed to take place the next day. 2 minutes later, the man added that she should let him know if she could take a few days off and that he appreciated her help in concluding the contract. At 11:19 p.m., Michelle replied to the message, saying that her husband had just woken her up and that they had apparently overslept his alarm clock. She added that the man had run out the door and would be leaving the house shortly, then added laughing that he would probably be late for work. Then Michelle wrote that she was sorry that Michael had been so involved in her responsibility. However, they did not have enough evidence to charge Michael or Michelle and had to let the man go. Michelle was then summoned for questioning again. Under the insight and pressure of the investigator, the woman broke down and revealed her secret affair with Michael. According to the woman, Michael had started planning 2 months before the crime to take Nathan's life so that she could receive a high payout from her husband's insurance policy and start a life together. Michelle said that she initially agreed to carry out the plan, but later changed her mind and tried to prevent the execution of the bloody plan. Therefore, she did not open the car in the garage as Michael had asked her to and also turned off Nathan's alarm clock, hoping that the criminals would be gone by the time they woke up. The investigators did not believe the woman's remorse. The correspondence clearly indicated that she had been actively involved in the plan. Later, new evidence confused the case. On December 7, Shannon appeared at the police station and revealed that Michael had forced her to give him an alibi for the night of the shooting. The woman stated that her friend Jessica had asked her to help 2 men she knew rob a dealer of illegal substances and that she would help cover up their involvement. In return, Jessica offered her 5% of Michael's profit. Shannon assured her, however, that she had agreed to help them because she thought the victim was a dangerous criminal. Shannon then revealed that she had met Michael at her friend's apartment on the night after the events that led to Nathan's death. When they arrived there, Michael confessed to her that he had shot his victim. When the two returned to the friend's apartment the next day, where they had met the day before, the woman noticed a strong smell of cleaning products and saw that the fireplace was completely clean and all 3 phones had been destroyed. Shannon assured the police that as soon as she found out what had happened, she immediately decided to confess everything to the authorities and added in tears that she was very afraid for her life after the confession. The police obtained footage from the hotel's surveillance camera, which showed that Michael and Shannon had arrived at the scene about 40 minutes after the crime. This confirmed the woman's statement, so the police decided to search the apartment of Corey, whom Shannon had identified as Michael's accomplice. They managed to obtain a search warrant. At about the same time, Jessica admitted to having bought latex gloves, a car cover, and an air freshener, all items they wanted to use in the attack. Simultaneously with the investigations, on Tuesday, December 7, 2010, the family and friends of his wife gathered in the chapel at the Air Force Base to honor and appreciate the sergeant. Colonel Sean Henderson, Nathan's squadron commander, praised the young airman's service to the Air Force and spoke of the merits the man had brought to his country. Nathan's other comrades praised his high work ethic, motivation, passion, and dedication. His learning ability and commitment to his profession also characterized him as a modest man who was a role model and inspired his colleagues. Eric, Nathan's brother, spoke of the love and unconditional support that Nathan had shown him throughout his life. With tears in his eyes, he said that he knew no one or could imagine anyone who would not want to be friends with Nathan and that he was a man who loved life and surfing. Eric added that Nathan had never forgotten his roots and was proud of his service to his country, was a good person who liked to have fun, and simply loved his wife and 4 children. The next day, on December 8, Michael Rodriguez, Corey Hawkins, and Jessica Austin were arrested on charges of murder with a firearm and conspiracy to murder and robbery without bail and taken to the Clark County Detention Center in Nevada. The next day, Michelle was also arrested under the same conditions and placed under observation to prevent her from committing suicide. On the same day Michelle was arrested, December 9, Nathan's body was transferred to Guam and buried there. Only his family and an honor guard from the Air Force Base attended the ceremony. On Wednesday, December 15, 2010, a funeral mass was held at the Church of St. Francis in Tamianing, where Nathan's family, friends, and colleagues said goodbye to him. Subsequently, military honors were bestowed upon him at the Veterans Cemetery in Petiguam. Nathan's motorcade consisted of motorcycles. Upon arrival, 6 officers carried the coffin, covered with the flag of the United States of America, from the hearse and brought it to Nathan's final resting place. Family and friends surrounded him to say their final goodbye, and just before the funeral, a salute was fired. Just over a month after Nathan's death, on Tuesday, January 4, 2011, charges of conspiracy to commit murder and robbery with a firearm, as well as murder with a firearm, were brought against the 4 defendants in Clark County District Court. Charges of possession of a firearm were additionally brought against 2 men. Each of the defendants denied involvement in the crime and assembled their own defense teams. Over the next 3 years, several trial dates were scheduled, which, however, were postponed for various reasons. Michelle's lawyer, Christina Weed, filed various motions, one of which aimed to exclude evidence related to the woman's phone on the grounds that the analysis of the phone had been conducted without a search warrant. According to court documents, some of the evidence on the phones was lost, but the police officers kept their own records of this evidence. On this basis, the defense attorney also requested that these pieces of evidence be removed from the proceedings due to lack of evidence preservation or destruction. However, all these motions were denied, and the trial was scheduled for September 2015. At the same time, Jessica Austin reached a deal with the prosecution after she was found guilty of conspiracy to murder. The trial finally took place on September 21, 2015. Michael Rudolph Rodriguez was the first of the defendants to stand trial. The prosecutor told the jurors in detail that Michael had shot Nathan while he was on his way to work. J. Manson Bauman said he had been walking his dog that night and initially, everything had been very quiet when suddenly 5 shots rang out. Just a few seconds after the shots, he saw a black Cadillac speeding away from the scene. In the end, Michael pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. On September 29, 2015, the man was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was also denied the right to appeal his sentence. During the sentencing, Michael looked straight ahead and showed no emotion as he learned of his sentence. A month later, the trial against Michelle took place in a court in Las Vegas. During the questioning, the defense attorney asked Michelle whether she had known that Michael Rodriguez was going to take her husband's life that night. The woman denied this and stated that Michael had forced her to do what led to Nathan's death and that the entire plan had gotten out of control. Prosecutor Michelle Fleck later rejected the defendant's defense, saying that the syndrome of the lonely and bored wife was no excuse for her actions. When Michelle was allowed to say a few words during the trial, the woman turned to Nathan's parents in tears, apologized to them, said that she loved him and their children, and then fainted. Michelle then pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a firearm. Through this confession, Michelle, like Michael, was able to avoid the death penalty. The victim's family also asked the court to waive the death penalty for Michelle. In her closing argument, the judge described the crime as incomprehensible and unbelievable and stated that she could not believe that Michelle continued to sleep next to her husband even though she knew he was exposed to an imminent and unnecessary death. The judge also noted that she did not believe Michelle had tried to sabotage the plan and found that much evidence suggested that the woman was far more involved than she was willing to admit. In October 2015, it was Corey Alexis Hawkins' turn. He also agreed to a deal to avoid the death penalty. His lawyer, Andrea L., asked for leniency to give his client a chance for parole one day. The judge denied the request because he was convinced that Corey had participated in planning the crime and was in close proximity when the murderer pulled the trigger. When the final judgment in the case against Michelle was pronounced in March 2016, the woman made several statements. For example, she stated that she was emotionally vulnerable at the time of the events, which led to major irreparable mistakes. She also expressed, in tears, her hope that everyone would be able to forgive her one day. Nathan's mother, Camelida, who had become the guardian of her 4 grandchildren, also had the opportunity to speak during the trial. She told her daughter-in-law that she had forgiven her because she was a religious woman and could see that Michelle's soul needed this. Camelida then spoke about the effects that Michelle's actions and Nathan's death had had on her children. Camelida said that despite therapy, the children still got scared when they heard loud noises and feared that their mother might do something to them, just as she had done to their father. Nathan's mother concluded her speech by asking the judge to sentence Michelle to life imprisonment without parole. Eric also commented on the sentencing of his sister-in-law, saying that they did not wish her death. He said it was enough for them that Michelle knew they would all live without her and that her children would grow up knowing what their mother had done. Eric's wife, Veronica, told Michelle that she hated her but that she simply did not deserve to spend another day outside and added that she did not deserve the last name Pete. Michelle was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment at the Floresmore Women's Correctional Facility in Las Vegas. Corey's sentence of life imprisonment without parole was confirmed a few months later, on September 20, 2016, in Las Vegas. Michelle had completely destroyed her life full of love by chasing after greed and a man she barely knew. 4 children lost their father, and a war veteran died just because his wife forgot that the youthful love she had had since high school was something truly beautiful and unique. Now, Michelle and Nathan's 4 children are growing up in the love and care of their paternal grandparents in their father's hometown in Guam. But their lives have also been profoundly affected by their mother's actions. This truly cruel act has destroyed many lives. The innocent Nathan, who had always done his best for his family, died at the hands of his wife's lover, and now their children are forever traumatized by what happened to them. It was incredibly lucky that all the criminals were convicted and had no claim to the money that would have been due to them after Nathan's death. Now the criminals will never leave prison and will be in a place where they actually belong. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself.
When choosing friends, one must be very careful. Sometimes, behind a seemingly friendly person, a truly sinister personality can hide. Today's story is about how dangerous the wrong choice can be. On August 29, 1994, an emergency occurred in the quiet small town of Winona, Virginia, USA. The postman was on his way to work at around 5 a.m. while it was still dark. As he drove past one of the houses, he saw thick black smoke. Naturally, the postman decided to stop to look around and help the people in the house. When he ran to the front door and knocked, no one answered. He then ran around the house looking for the back door. The man ran to a neighbor's house and called emergency services. Within minutes, both the police and firefighters were on site. At this point, the ground floor was already fully engulfed in flames. When firefighters broke down the door, they smelled a strong odor of gasoline, which was likely used to intensify the flames. After the firefighters managed to locate the source of ignition and extinguish the fire, 4 bodies were found in the house. The victims of the fire were in different rooms and were so badly burned that a forensic pathologist had to be called in to identify the bodies. He was able to determine that 37-year-old Teresa Hodges had died on the living room sofa on the ground floor. She was wearing only her underwear. Her shorts and a lock of hair were found near the stairs, presumably where the struggle began. The body of 41-year-old William Blaine Hodges was found in the upstairs bedroom, partially hidden under a pile of laundry and a torn curtain. In the children's room on the first floor, 11-year-old Winter and 3-year-old Anna were found in bed, huddled together. Both girls were the children of the couple who died in the fire, at least according to the initial version. However, the forensic examination revealed an even more disturbing fact. Since the bodies were not severely damaged, it was determined that none of the victims died as a result of the fire. They were all killed before the fire broke out. Teresa was strangled with clear marks on her neck. Her body was the most severely burned, suggesting the fire likely originated near her. The autopsy revealed that after strangulation, her body had been doused with gasoline and set on fire. The couple's 2 children were shot in the head. Blaine suffered the same fate. .22 caliber bullets were removed from the bodies of the 3 victims. The weapon was found next to the body of the head of the family. Beside him was also an empty gasoline can. The crime scene looked as if the man had killed his children and his wife for some reason and decided to burn the house down. He doused the bodies with gasoline, set them on fire, and then shot himself in the head. Relatives and friends of the couple, however, contradicted this version. They believed that Blaine had no reason to treat his family so brutally and to take his own life. He was a loving husband and father. The investigators decided to analyze the husband's background. It quickly became clear that he had recently experienced some problems. In '91, Blaine was fired from the post office for stealing $4,500 from the till. 2 years later, he was sentenced to a 6-month prison term. He was also ordered to pay double the fine. Blaine's appeal was rejected, forcing him to serve the entire sentence. After his release and the trial, serious financial difficulties arose, making him unable to pay the compensation. The investigators believed that the financial setbacks could have been a valid motive for killing his relatives and subsequently taking his own life. However, the forensic experts who examined the scene gradually encountered inconsistencies that contradicted this theory. The strangest fact was that the revolver found near the body had no barrel. It had simply been disassembled, suggesting that the weapon could not have been used to carry out such a plan. Criminal technicians later confirmed that the internal structure of the barrel did not match the bullets found in the victims. No soot from fire was found in Blaine's lungs, which also raised questions. A disturbing surprise was the cut telephone lines, which gave the impression that an attempt had been made to hinder calls to the police and fire department. It clearly made no sense for a man to cut the lines if he was attempting to take his own life and kill his family beforehand. Nevertheless, when information about the deaths was released, it was not mentioned that it could have been a murder or even a suicide. Even information about the fire was withheld. It was simply stated that the four-member family had died in an accident. However, evidence for the version that a third person was involved in the massacre was only considered as additional circumstantial evidence. The robbery version was not considered. The family was not wealthy, everyone in the neighborhood knew that. Thieves had nothing worthwhile to steal here. The neighborhood was generally quiet, peaceful, and safe with a low crime rate. Investigators did not believe this was the work of a madman. It was more likely that the act had a personal motive and that someone wanted to take revenge on the Hodges. Most telling was the forensic pathologist's report, which highlighted two important points. Firstly, the manner in which Teresa was killed seemed suspicious. It was necessary to understand why the woman was killed in a different way than the others. As previously mentioned, Teresa was strangled. The rest of the family was shot. The mother and girls were killed between 1 o'clock at night. At the same time, according to expert opinion, Blaine died long before his wife and daughters were killed. He was killed first. This was another important point. The man's murder happened hours before the deaths of the others. Obviously, Blaine could not have been responsible for the murder of his relatives. Most likely, the Hodges actually had an insidious enemy. To find out who this might be, investigators decided to contact the couple's family and friends. It might also help to reconstruct the events of the last few days in these people's lives. Teresa's mother said that the Hodges family had gone fishing the day before, and on the day of the crime had gone to a conference in a neighboring town, leaving the children in the care of a relative who lived nearby. The mother also said that after Blaine lost his job and fell into financial difficulties, the couple decided to try their luck selling Amway products. Afterward, they told many people about the fabulous missing word they intended to earn with it and encouraged them to join the company. Perhaps some were enticed by these stories. On that day, they had a visit from a guest named Marshall Elroy. He also worked for Amway and wanted to test stain remover, but Teresa's mother didn't know if the meeting had taken place. This information interested the investigators, and they decided to speak with the man. The investigators met with Marshall. He explained that he had met with the Hodges family that day, but nothing unusual had happened. Marshall had gone to the basement with 11-year-old Winter that day and demonstrated the effect of the cleaning product to the schoolgirl. The man recalled that when he arrived at the Hodges' house, a stranger was painting the door. He expressed his displeasure that a year-old girl had gone into the basement with a man unknown to him, but nothing else unusual happened. Marshall then went home, promising to listen to the tape later and make preparations for the next day. Nothing indicated that they expected any problems at that time. The entire family was still alive. Afterward, investigators began to notice oddities. When Teresa called her friend again to check the schedule, she had left a callback number that turned out to be a payphone at a gas station. Teresa could indeed be reached at this number, and arrangements for the trip were made. However, it was completely unclear why the woman had suddenly decided to leave a payphone number and call from there. The answer was simple. At that time, the telephone lines in the house had already been cut. Teresa didn't yet understand what was happening and thought the phone was simply broken. So she used another opportunity to contact her friend. This version was quickly confirmed by Teresa's other friends, who told her about their complaints regarding their communication that day. The woman was unhappy that the telephone at home wasn't working. However, the time frames and testimonies varied considerably. According to the generally accepted version, the family did not go to church the next morning, which seemed unthinkable for them. They were very religious. Afterward, according to the plan, a meeting with Amway members was supposed to take place at their house. But when the guests gathered and arrived, they found a note left by Teresa on the door stating that there would be no meeting. This also seemed strange. The investigators received the same letter. In it, the woman, with Teresa's signature, apologized and stated that the family had an emergency and therefore all had to leave urgently. The Hodges were probably already dead at this point. It turned out there was so much contradictory information that the police needed more evidence to piece everything together. On the advice of Teresa's mother, the investigators decided to meet with a man named Earl Bramblett. He was the family's best friend. They were so close that the couple's children called the man Uncle Earl. Of course, he must have known more about the couple than anyone else. Earl was working at a printing shop at the time and was supposed to be at his workplace but couldn't be reached. His colleagues were informed that he should report to the station as soon as he showed up for work. On the same day, the man provided feedback to the investigators and arranged a meeting for 5 p.m. after work. When he was informed in the interrogation room about the death of 4 family members who were close friends of his, he seemed very agitated. He even sounded furious that the police should find and punish the murderers. This statement immediately attracted the attention of the investigators because the murder version of the couple and their children had not yet appeared in the news or any reports. Everywhere it was reported that they died as a result of an accident. Even the suicide version had not been uttered anywhere until then. When the man saw the astonished looks of the investigators, he tried to correct himself, saying he had expressed himself incorrectly or misunderstood them. During the narration, Earl then blurted out a few more important details of the murder that only the perpetrator could have known, in particular that Teresa's body had been doused with gasoline, which he could not have known, as the suspicion that he was involved in the tragedy had already taken root in the minds of the investigators. When asked when he had last seen his friends alive, Earl immediately adopted a defensive posture and began to evade answers. The police tried to calm him down, assuring him that they were not suspecting him but only wanted to reconstruct the chronology of events. Finally, the man blurted out that he couldn't remember when he had last seen his friend and his family. It had been a very long time ago. This seemed strange to them because they were very close and met often. Furthermore, one of the Hodges' neighbors had already told the police that he had seen Earl the evening before the tragic events. The investigators decided to try their luck and showed Marshal Elroy Earl's photo, and they were not wrong. It was determined that Earl was the man who had painted the door at the Hodges' house the day before the murder. It was he who had reprimanded his friend's eldest daughter for going into the basement with a stranger. The fact that he allegedly couldn't remember seemed suspicious, of course. When Earl received all this information, he again adopted a defensive posture and denied everything. There was nothing to accuse the man of, and he was simply released. The investigators were 100% sure that he knew more than he was saying. Now it had to be proven that Earl had actually been at his friend's house that day. If he could be caught lying, he could be exposed. Police officers questioned the neighbors. Several people had noticed the pickup truck in the early morning hours before the fire. It was parked near the victim's house and drove away shortly before the fire. The pickup matched the description of the vehicle Earl had used. This meant that he had lied about a long-standing meeting with friends and was the last person near the deceased's house before the fire broke out. During the investigation, it was determined that Earl punched his time card at work 20 minutes after the fire broke out. The driving time from the Hodges house to his printing shop was exactly 20 minutes. When Earl noticed the mistake, he tried to cover up the entry and was caught doing so. Furthermore, there was a strange circumstance. Earl was not present at the Hodges' funeral, even though everyone knew him as the family's closest friend. All of this only strengthened the suspicion that made Earl the main suspect in the murder of 4 people and the arson. Earl Bramblett was born in Texas in 1942. He was the second oldest child in a family of 5 children. His father was an alcoholic and a very abusive man who tormented them for years. Nevertheless, Earl had success both in school and in sports. As he frequently moved and changed schools, Earl developed the ability to quickly make friends. He seemed like a friendly, easygoing guy. While the teenager attended high school, his mother divorced his tyrannical father and moved with the children to start a new life. Now Earl could finally lead a peaceful and successful life. He received a scholarship for his athletic achievements and went to college. However, this did not help him get an education. He attended 3 schools, but eventually dropped out of all of them. Afterward, he moved in 9 to Virginia and began working in his father's printing shop. Later, he married, and 2 sons resulted from the marriage. During this time, he also became an assistant track and field coach at the high school. Later, he met a student, Blaine Hodges. Earl Bramblett became his coach and mentor until the young man graduated in 1971. During this time, Blaine got married. Despite the significant age difference, he and his coach remained good friends and maintained close contact for many years. In the late 70s, Earl's role in his father's printing shop became increasingly important, and he took on more work. All of this benefited him when his father gradually retired due to his deteriorating health. After a few years, Earl took over the business, hired employees, and spent more and more time partying during this period. He worked less and partied more. According to Earl, among the female employees was a 17-year-old whom he caught falsifying time cards and punished. To get revenge on her boss, she convinced her 30-year-old sister to accuse Earl of harassment. The man was arrested, but he had an alibi. He was traveling that day. The judge strongly warned the police not to bring the case to court without thoroughly examining the evidence. Earl continued his business, earned good money, and traveled more and more often across the country. However, all these travels seemed quite suspicious to him. Despite his means, he was very and resembled a vagrant who stayed in the cheapest motels or simply slept in his pickup. On their trips through various cities, investigators noticed that the man was always accompanied by young women and men much younger than himself. For example, a 14-year-old schoolgirl named Tammy Akers. She lived only a block away from 30-year-old Earl's family home and spent her time at the printing shop and with his wife Mary, who had 2 younger sisters. They were the same age as Tammy, so their paths regularly crossed. On February 7, 1977, Tammy and her classmate Angela Rad left the house to go to class, but instead decided to skip school and hitchhike into town. They never returned home. The teenagers had already been seen on similar adventures when they skipped school, so their families did not immediately report to the police, hoping the girls would return home. However, when 24 hours had passed, the families became alarmed. It was not the first time the girls had run away, and no one took their statement seriously. The police called the search a waste of time and resources. Police officers urged the parents to return home and continue waiting for their children. Ultimately, this never happened, and the case remained unsolved for years. When Earl came into police custody on suspicion of murdering the Hodges family, investigators noticed his connection to one of the schoolgirls, Tammy, who had disappeared 17 years earlier. The man was still a suspect in that case at the time. Furthermore, investigators noticed that the suspect's circle always included a number of adolescents and young adults who were clearly too young for him. It was unclear what they had to do with each other. When investigators expressed their suspicion about his preference for schoolgirls, Earl remained defensive. He stated he had no idea where the missing girls were. However, he admitted that he often spent time with Tammy due to financial and personal problems. His marriage was in crisis at the time, a divorce was pending, and he had to pay child support for 2 children. This brought them closer, but the man continued to deny involvement in the family's murder and the disappearance of the schoolgirls. Again, he was unresponsive. The investigators continued to gather information. Later, 2 girls came to the station and recounted interesting facts about Earl Bramblett. They had personally witnessed how the man, during one of the parties, had gotten so drunk that he took his pistol and shot at the ceiling, then tearfully confessed that he had hurt Tammy. When asked about the incident, Earl stated that he could not remember it. It was decided to keep a closer eye on this suspicious man. Later, the sister of the missing Tammy, Linda, confessed that Earl had harassed her at the age of 12 and then raped her for years. On one of these occasions, he forced himself on her by threatening her with a weapon. She was also sure that he had harassed Tammy when she was 9 years old. Now the investigators had a new suspicion. It seemed that Bramblett not only constantly surrounded himself with young girls and boys, but also met schoolgirls who always represented a desirable target for him. As it turned out, at the time of the death of the 4 members of the Hodges family, Earl was staying in another cheap motel near their house. On the 3rd day of the investigation into the Hodges family murder, investigators decided to speak with Earl again, but the suspect didn't answer his phone. His brother said he had seen him at the motel where he had also been on the night of the Hodges massacre. When the police checked his room, they found a suicide note and Earl himself. The man was depressed, unhappy with the authorities' visit, and refused to answer questions. The suspect finally agreed to come to the police station in the afternoon but did not appear. The investigators returned to the motel. Earl's room was locked and no one opened it. The investigators suspected that he had, after all, carried out his plan to take his own life. The motel receptionist was asked to hand over the master key as they feared another body might be waiting inside. To the surprise of the police officers, Earl Bramblett returned only half an hour later. He was again extremely unhappy that the police had come, even tried to chase them away, and insisted that he could not be arrested for murder. But the investigators had something to counter with. They had already obtained a search warrant for the motel room where the man was staying as well as for his car. During the search, a notebook was found in particular which contained numerous notes on criminal activities. Earl had 4 empty shell casings with him, as well as a .22 caliber pistol, the same caliber used to shoot the victims. He also had several crime novels and books on forensic science with him. The search and discovery of all these items took place before the eyes of the stunned suspect. He seemed shocked that he hadn't had time to dispose of the evidence. Nevertheless, the police did not arrest Earl. There was no concrete evidence linking him to the murders. The weapon was sent for ballistic examination. The suspect took the opportunity and left town the next day. Earl Bramblett told friends he wanted to go to his sister in Indiana. He did indeed visit her, told her everything that had happened, and was very upset. The woman, in turn, asked him if he had an alibi for the night the entire family was killed and burned. Earl answered that he had indeed visited the Hodges and left around midnight, but he hadn't done anything. Earl explained that he didn't want to tell the officers that he had left the family's house late because he feared he would then become even more suspected of murder. His sister believed it was due to the addiction to illegal substances that Earl had suffered from for several years. She and her husband felt uncomfortable in the house when her brother was there. Fortunately, he didn't want to stay long, but he insisted that her sister not inform the police about his visit. Earl left quite quickly. When his connection to the murders became obvious, she recounted everything precisely, as she remained convinced that Earl was involved in the family's murder. During the conversation with the police officers, her sister suddenly remembered the 2 boxes her brother had brought a year earlier. He had asked her not to open them and simply keep them. The woman had no idea what was inside but decided to take the boxes to the station, as she had a suspicion. The sister suspected it might have something to do with Tammy and her friend who had previously disappeared. The sheriff's office unpacked the boxes and found about 6 audio tapes, hundreds of photos, and a sock that by size and color belonged to a teenage girl. Tammy's family could not find any resemblance to the missing girl's belongings, but Teresa's mother believed they were the belongings of her murdered granddaughter, Winter. Everything was sent for forensics. The investigators listened to audio cassettes for hours. The cassettes were a rambling diary that Earl had kept since about 1992. He took his tape recorder everywhere with him. While listening to the diary, the police realized that the man might be suffering from paranoia related to his consumption of illegal substances. Particularly disturbing entries concerned the problems of Blaine Hodges and the embezzlement he was accused of. Earl began to devise a bizarre conspiracy theory. He felt attracted to Winter, but felt that a friend might have used his eldest daughter as a kind of bait in the plot. Earl was convinced that Winter was deliberately flirting with him. She was a cunning, thoughtful girl, a Mata Hari-type spy. This crazy idea was recorded by him while Blaine was serving a 6-month prison sentence. Despite his incoherent rambling, the important idea was clearly understandable. Earl was indeed unhealthily attracted to his friend's eldest daughter. The whole thing was the diary of a madman in which he tried to justify his animalistic feelings for the 11-year-old schoolgirl with some ridiculous conspiracy theories. To get more information, the police searched the premises of the printing shop where Earl Bramblett worked. Suspicious figures were found, 2 of which were small and 2 large. They showed gunshot wounds that precisely matched the entry wounds of 3 family members. One of the larger figures had its throat cut, which was how the family's mother had died. Such circumstances do not seem coincidental. The information about the injuries of the deceased was confidential, and no one except the police officers had access to it. Earl refused to comment on these strange things. Another .22 caliber pistol was found in the man's pickup truck. After a ballistic examination, it was proven that this was the weapon used to shoot the Hodges. Pubic hairs matching Bramblett's DNA were found on the murdered girl's bed. The police finally had enough evidence to file charges, but Earl had disappeared. He was placed on the wanted list. As it later turned out, he fled to Stark, South Carolina, and lived there for 2 years. He bought a house, got a dog, and took care of it. They went for walks every day and visited the neighborhood store where Earl bought beef jerky for the dog and cheap beer for himself. He started a vegetable garden, bought a house for his sons, and began renovations. In October 1997, a trial was scheduled. Earl had no money for a lawyer. He was assigned a public defender. The lawyer insisted that his client suffered from mental disorders that could lead to a breakdown with tragic consequences. However, this could not be confirmed with the help of experts. During the first interrogation, there were no blood traces on Earl, but there was an explanation. The prosecutor argued that Earl had washed and dried his clothes in the basement of the Hodges house before setting the house on fire. Bramblett claimed all evidence used against him had been fabricated, including a pubic hair and a weapon, and the tape recording of his voice had been altered to create the impression that he was obsessed with Winter. In reality, he had been the family's closest friend for all those years, and had helped them as much as possible during a financially difficult time. Earl gave Blaine a printing press so he could open a minute printing shop and earn additional income. But Blaine did not support his idea and simply sold the equipment to the church for $4,000, which Earl naturally disliked. The accused also testified that he had helped the family renovate the house to make it nicer for Winter, who didn't like the decor. On the evening before their disappearance, Winter allegedly asked Earl to stay at their house because the girl was afraid someone was after her father, she said. He agreed, but Teresa reportedly didn't let him stay overnight because Blaine might not like it, so Earl left. Now the accused believed that the family might have had enemies who came to kill the occupants. They might have been rivals of Teresa's brother, who dealt in illegal substances and had debts, and the family was killed to intimidate the brother. Teresa's father told the jury that the accused had access to the murdered family's house. The father had advised Teresa a few days before the murder to take Earl's keys to their house and change the locks for safety. One of Teresa's friends confirmed this information and clarified that Teresa was afraid of Earl. The brother testified that the accused had long been interested in serial killers and had read a lot on the subject. The man believed that Earl was preparing for the crime in this way. At the trial, a park ranger spoke who had seen Teresa, the girls, and Earl fishing the evening before the murder. They were all in good spirits, and there seemed to be no reason for concern. The only thing unclear was why the father of the family, Blaine, had not gone with them. It turned out he had a lot to do that day, and the man had to stay home, and the family went with their best friend Earl, whom everyone loved so much. On the prosecution's side, several women also spoke, claiming Bramblett had drugged and raped them with alcohol and illegal substances when they were minors. The defense presented several witnesses who spoke about the accused's childhood: alcoholic parents, abuse, 15 moves, paranoia, and the need to earn money since childhood. Earl's cellmate appeared in court and claimed the accused had confessed to him the murder of the family. According to Earl, his parents had caught him harassing Winter that day, which is why he decided to kill the entire family before they could report him to the police. But Earl continued to deny everything. The picture of what happened gradually became clearer. Blaine was allegedly killed first after he came home. Then Earl attacked Teresa and strangled her on the living room couch. Both girls were shot in their beds. They were not raped. As early as December 16, Earl was found guilty of the murder of 4 members of the Hodges family and sentenced to death. The state of Virginia has since abolished the death penalty, but it was still in force at the time, and Earl fell under it. He was given the choice between the electric chair and lethal injection. The man chose the electric chair in protest, as he considered his conviction unjustified. After the trial, Earl was urged to show remorse and confess to the murders of the schoolgirls Tammy and Angela. There was every reason to believe he was guilty. However, he refused to make a direct confession but instead made the bizarre claim that he had died in a fire. The man refused to comment on his words, although it was clear to everyone that this was a kind of confession for the murder of the 2 girls. Furthermore, the handwriting matched the murder of the Hodges family. All of Earl's appeals and his clemency petitions to the governor were rejected. On April 9, 2003, 60-year-old Earl Bramblett was served his last meal. He had not ordered a special meal. He was served the same food as all other prisoners: scrambled eggs, boiled potatoes, corn, and chocolate cake. When he was given the last word, the man emphasized that he had never killed anyone and went to his death with a clear conscience. Earl thanked his relatives. The murderer's heart stopped beating at 9:09 p.m. that same day. The bodies of the missing girls, Tammy and Angela, have not been found to this day. Could Earl really have had something to do with their disappearance? To this day, some believe that this execution was a miscarriage of justice and that the true murderer of the family is still at large. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with its spread. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video further. Subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care. The justice system is not flawless, but there are places where it is less perfect than in others. Under such circumstances, investigations can drag on for years without apparent reason, and obvious criminals can be acquitted. Getting to the bottom of the truth is sometimes almost impossible. Scarlett Keeling was born in July 1992 in the United Kingdom. Her mother Fiona had 9 children from 5 different men, but none of the fathers played a significant role in her life. The family, consisting of the mother and the 9 children, lived largely on state benefits. The mother also worked part-time. The children were homeschooled and lived in a poor neighborhood in Devon, Great Britain. They shared a small plot of land with an equally modest house and a few caravans where all the children and their mother lived. Fiona's first child was a boy. His name was Halloran. At the time of the tragic events, he was 19 years old. Then came Silas, who was years younger. The third child was Scarlett, born another 2 years later. These 3 children were from Richard Keeling, who was of Libyan descent and worked for a construction company. During the time when the parents' relationship was just developing, both lived close to each other in Hertfordshire, but after the birth of the little girl, they soon separated. Next, 2 girls named Marilyn and Kais were born. They were a little more than a year apart. At the time of the tragedy, the first girl was 13 years old and the second was 12 years old. The father of these girls was Chris Osborne, who was involved in trade at the time of their birth, but his relationship with Fiona also didn't work out. Next came Isaac and then Kate, who were 10 and 9 years old respectively at the time of the tragedy. Their biological father turned out to be a man named Paul, who was a market trader. He met Fiona by chance when she was trading in London. Here she offered army equipment and her next lover offered pottery. Their relationship was quite short, but with Paul, Fiona moved to an area of Devon where she lived until the tragic events we are reporting to you about today. It was a provincial area that offered a much more spacious plot of land for such a large family. The mother wanted to expand the property for the younger generation. After moving to Devon, she continued her relationship with Paul, but it was almost doomed from the start. The couple had disagreements and serious conflicts. They continued to live together just to have some space. At the same time, they refused to pay rent, and so it happened that they were eventually evicted from their apartment. At that very moment, the relationship with Paul also ended. Later, Fiona had 2 more children, Kinderin and Aurora, who were born a year apart. The large family was forced to live in a small, state-provided apartment. During this time, Fiona met a man named Adam Foster, who worked as a construction entrepreneur and laid floors. Her last 2 children were from him, but this time too, the relationship did not last long. After another separation, Fiona was left alone with 9 children. Most of the time, Fiona homeschooled the younger generation. From time to time, however, the children also attended public schools when circumstances were favorable for the family. During this time, the Keelings were described by everyone as decent, polite, and tidy children who showcased their abilities and did not give rise to any suspicion that their mother might be abusing them. Time passed, and the teenagers grew up, and not under the most favorable conditions, considering their living circumstances. Fiona tried her best to give them everything they needed, but raising 9 children alone was an impossible task. Fiona herself was repeatedly caught with alcohol or illegal substances. She tried her best to protect the younger generation from these harmful addictions. However, they could only afford to live in marginalized areas where the local offerings left much to be desired, and many residents consumed illegal substances, setting a bad example for their children. Scarlett grew older and began to take an interest in the forbidden sides of life. Fiona knew that her daughter had smoked a few times. Some of Scarlett's friends told her that she often went to raves where she partied in dubious company. She often smoked and drank alcoholic beverages. According to her mother, Scarlett looked older than she actually was. At the age of 14, the girl started dating boys. Fiona found out about this and insisted that her daughter go to a free clinic for contraception advice. Despite the difficulties the woman faced in her life, Fiona wanted to keep her children out of trouble and early pregnancies. According to her relatives, Scarlett was an active and cheerful girl, a beauty who attracted a lot of attention. She loved horses and swimming and dreamed of joining an art group and being creatively active. In 2006, Fiona had a boyfriend named Rob Clark. He was wealthier than the other men in her life. A year later, the couple began to make plans and decided to travel with their children, choosing India. They wanted to visit the famous resort of Goa and explore the country for about 6 months. The choice of Goa was not accidental. Rob had been there many times and loved the resort. For Fiona, Rob's suggestion seemed incredible, as she had never left England. This adventure was to become a great adventure for the entire Keeling family. The woman hesitated for a long time, and it was not just the journey itself that worried her. The long journey involved great expense. Her eldest son had decided to stay in the UK due to problems with his papers, so she had to feed 8 children and 2 adults for at least 6 months. Fiona did not want to be entirely dependent on Rob, so she decided to pay for part of the trip herself. She used her savings, sold some things, and also took some money from social welfare. Finally, everything was ready. It took a long time to prepare, pack, and pay for the trip. The whole family was very excited about the upcoming journey. The journey began at the end of 2007. In November, Rob, Fiona, and their 8 children traveled to Anjuna in Goa. This was the first point of the planned trip. The place was a quiet coastal town that is also one of the country's most famous beaches. Many people know that hippie culture is widespread here. You notice it immediately when you leave the airport. In addition, huge parties take place here in various clubs. The atmosphere was quite relaxed, and there was always something to celebrate. The British tourists liked it very much from the start, the warm weather, the sea, and the relaxed life. But by early February, the couple and their children had had enough of the hustle and bustle and parties in Anjuna. They wanted to explore other parts of India. Everyone agreed to move on except for Scarlett. During her time on the coast, she met a man named Julio Lober. He was a local tour guide who organized excursions and quickly befriended the girl. Scarlett distributed flyers to promote his activities, and he also took her along as an assistant guide on his excursions. She even wanted to stay with him to continue these activities and enjoy the popular beach. Fiona did not agree with this. Of course, it all seemed questionable to her from the beginning, as it was a 15-year-old schoolgirl who wanted to stay in a foreign country with an unknown man without supervision. It did not seem safe, but Scarlett knew exactly what to push for. Finally, she managed to convince her mother that it was a good idea. The girl would get used to independence, relax, and earn work and money. What could go wrong in such a paradisiacal place? In fact, India is on the list of the most dangerous countries where many crimes are committed, especially against women. Therefore, it was very dangerous for a girl to stay here alone. Fiona was always very loyal to her children. She kept them from doing bad things, but everyone knew how to placate and persuade her to get their way. The woman was calm and friendly, and it worked again. Scarlett was allowed to stay with her buddy Julio, but had to promise to attend fewer parties and not go anywhere alone at night. When the matter was settled, Fiona, Rob, and the 7 remaining children set off on a tour of other cities in early February 2008. Unfortunately, at this time, the real black mark in the family's life began. In mid-February, the family's eldest son, who had stayed in the United Kingdom, was hit by a car on a pedestrian crossing. The 19-year-old Halloran was taken to the hospital and suffered severe injuries. The doctors informed Fiona about the incident. After hearing about the accident, the entire Keeling family prepared to return home to support Halloran. Scarlett met with her family and began to pack. On the same day, February 17, her mother spoke with her to get her bearings and coordinate their departure. Scarlett wanted to go to a Valentine's Day party. The woman was against it, but the girl still managed to convince her to let her go to the party under the pretext of saying goodbye to her friends. The teenager promised to be back by midnight, so her mother let her go and she drove off with Giulio. At that moment, the woman did not suspect that she was seeing her daughter for the last time and that the party would end fatally. Until then, Scarlett's life on the coast had been a standardized routine. During the day, she distributed flyers for Giulio and accompanied him as a tour guide in some places. She could serve food on the beach and enjoy the moonlight, and in the evening, the party life began. When a 15-year-old girl earned money, she went out to spend it. She worked hard and relaxed even more. Scarlett enjoyed herself until midnight and returned with Giulio to his aunt's house where he lived. The young Keeling quickly got used to this active rhythm. Everything seemed to please her and she didn't want to leave at all. But the story with her older brother changed everything and became a great sorrow. The girl understood that her brother needed help and that she could not leave him in need. Therefore, she decided to return with her family, but in the end, Scarlett decided to disappear completely. That evening, the boy was very tired and felt bad. So he decided to stay at home, but Scarlett and Giulio's 16-year-old sister Ruby went to the last party. During their shared vacation, Scarlett confessed that she had a romantic relationship with Giulio. He even bought her a motorcycle. For Ruby, this was a great revelation because at that time she was only 15 years old and Giulio was 10 years older. After that, however, they did not talk about the subject anymore. Anyway, the girls went to a local bar, then they switched to several places where they each drank, but in moderation. After midnight, they both went home. However, Scarlett did not want to stay at Ruby's house as her family was already waiting for her. She wanted to go to her family, so the girls talked a little more and separated around 1 in the morning in a friendly tone. They also promised to stay in touch after Scarlett's return to the United Kingdom, and later Scarlett planned to return to the resort to visit her acquaintances. Unfortunately, these plans were not to come true. The girl was never seen alive again. She never returned to the house where the family lived, but no one was looking for her at that time. Her mother thought she was at Giulio's house and would return in the morning, but even in the morning she was not there. On the morning after the party, on February 18, 2008, the half-naked body of the girl was found by casual passers-by on the beach. They immediately reported this to the police. The deceased was identified as 15-year-old Scarlett Keeling. Her mother was notified. The woman, already depressed because of her son's condition, almost fainted from shock. She recovered a little and immediately went to the scene of the tragedy. During the initial investigation, the police determined that the body was floating in the water, so drowning by accident was determined as the cause of death. Despite the obvious signs of violence and blows on Scarlett, the Indian police officers believed that she had simply gotten drunk on the beach, fallen asleep, and drowned. Of course, the mother protested. She was ready to seek justice. Unfortunately, at this point, the absurdity of the local justice system became apparent. It took 4 weeks during which Fiona fought daily to obtain a second autopsy and a review of the verdict. She visited the mortuary where her daughter's body was kept and took photos of it so that she would have proof of her words. The woman seriously feared that the incident would simply be dismissed. The reasons for this were valid, as the police claimed it was an accident. They naturally wanted to hush up the incident so as not to scare away tourists and harm the resort. Fiona was sure that the numerous bruises on her daughter's body, including severe injuries in the genital area, clearly indicated a violent death. She was also sure that her daughter had been raped. But the investigators justified the partial absence of clothing by saying that it had been torn off by the waves. The police attributed the bruises on Scarlett's head to her hitting her head on sharp rocks at the bottom. Her belongings did not appear to have been particularly searched. Realizing that no one would help in the search, the woman continued to seek justice. Fiona herself spoke with several witnesses and even examined the spot where her daughter had been found to look for clues. Surprisingly, she actually found something that the police had overlooked, specifically several items of Scarlett's clothing lying in the bushes and very close by on the beach. The second autopsy, including a toxicological examination, was performed a month after her death at the end of March 2008. The results of the analysis showed the presence of alcohol and illegal substances in the girl's blood. In addition, more than 50 violent injuries, including cuts and bruises, were found, confirming a violent cause of death. There was too little water in her lungs to say that Scarlett suffocated and drowned from water. It is more likely that the water entered her lungs only after her death, and an attempt was made to dispose of the body in the water. A more precise toxicological analysis of the blood revealed that heavy forbidden substances were present. But how could these have entered her body if Scarlett, as her relatives said, only smoked? The questioning of witnesses made it possible to reconstruct the events of that fateful night when Scarlett left her friend Ruby. The police found a witness named Mike, who was also from London and on vacation. The man saw how the girl behaved around 3 a.m. when she entered a bar. She was heavily intoxicated, had difficulties walking, and talked some nonsense. She collapsed in front of the entrance and let herself be helped up. Scarlett immediately attracted the attention of many men, but the owner of the bar tried to keep no one near her. The girl then went to the back of the kitchen where she chatted with 2 Indian men for about an hour. Mike was sure that she was familiar with them and was probably drinking or taking illegal substances. Mike knew that this was a quite dangerous beach, as there had recently been an increase in gang assaults and rapes here. Illegal substances could be bought in almost any establishment. According to the witness, he saw Scarlett leave the bar around 4:30 a.m. with a local man. When the witness himself left the bar about half an hour later, he saw the man drag Scarlett into some bushes. Since she did not resist or scream, he assumed that the couple just wanted some privacy for consensual sex. The man did not intervene and simply walked away. Based on these statements, the police arrested the man. On March 2, 2008, Samson Dusa, 36, and Placido Cavallo, 47, who worked at the establishment where Scarlett was last seen before the murder, were arrested. On June 5, the case was forwarded to the Central Bureau of Investigation. The 2 men were arrested on suspicion of murder, rape, consumption of illegal substances, and abuse of a minor. Later, the charge of attempted destruction of evidence was added. Unfortunately, the Indian justice system did not work quickly enough, so the trial in Goa was only scheduled 2 years later in March 2010. In the meantime, preparations for the trial were underway. By this time, 72 witnesses had already been questioned, and law enforcement agencies had spoken with them. However, just a few days before the hearing, the proceedings were suddenly suspended. Samson and Placido still denied involvement in Scarlett's death, and there was no direct evidence against them. All possible evidence had been wiped away. The prosecution decided to continue questioning witnesses. By 2013, 30 people had been selected who allowed a more precise reconstruction of the chronology of events on that fateful night. The most important witness was the Englishman Mike, who could see the moment of violence against Scarlett with his own eyes, but simply did not realize that it was against her will. Unfortunately, he had already refused to return to Goa in April 2012 to testify in court in the case. He later confessed to the media that he was simply afraid to travel to the country where such a crime had occurred, as he feared for his life. The man was convinced that local gangs were involved. Rumors arose that Mike had been threatened. Allegedly, the Indian authorities even initiated criminal proceedings against him because he had seen something that night. The man's statement was eventually removed from the file as he was considered an unreliable witness. Fiona was appalled by Mike's behavior and openly called him a coward. In the grieving mother's opinion, the witness could have saved Scarlett when he saw her being dragged into the bushes or could have helped punish those responsible. But both times, he simply refused to do so. The grieving woman even tried to meet Mike herself in the United Kingdom and record a video of the witness's statement to present it in court, but nothing worked. It seemed as if even the police were putting obstacles in the way of justice. They kept trying to find a way to make Scarlett herself responsible for her death, for example, through entries in her diary in which she wrote that she had had enough of angina and wanted to go home. The investigators considered this a depressive state and referred to her voluntary withdrawal from life. This was an attempt to end the investigation and close the case. However, no one believed that Scarlett could have taken such a step, as she had never shown psychological problems or a tendency to withdraw from life. Due to these and other problems, the hearings were postponed by a full 8 years, during which Fiona was constantly in the media spotlight. She had to debunk many rumors and gossip that cast a negative light on her daughter. It seemed as if justice would be served, but on September 23, 2016, Sampson and Placido were acquitted due to lack of evidence. Fiona was present at the sentencing and was stunned by the court's decision. After years of delay, the defendants were acquitted. Fiona accused the police of being corrupt and wanted to take the case to a higher court. She swore to continue fighting for justice for her dead daughter. The lawyers of the acquitted claimed that the Central Bureau of Investigation had no evidence from the beginning. They continued to argue that it was a voluntary death or an accident, completely ignoring the confirmed medical evidence, which included 52 injuries, most of which Scarlett could not have inflicted on herself. The defense lawyers insisted that no one had given the girl illegal substances, but that she had taken them herself. Fiona felt a real lawlessness. She had to wait 4 years until she could receive her daughter's body and properly bury it. This could only happen in June 2012. Then the woman hoped for a just verdict, but it took another 4 years until the suspects were acquitted. It seemed as if she had lost and returned empty-handed to the United Kingdom. Unexpectedly, a few months later, in February 2017, the court verdict was challenged. Fiona lived with her children in Devon, separated from Rob, and continued to build her life. It seemed that hope for a resolution of the case was completely lost. However, she took up the fight with renewed vigor and was able to prove that the judge had obviously disregarded the regulations during the hearing and the decision. A miscarriage of justice had been rendered. Now, both perpetrators were investigated again. Finally, the Angina Public Prosecutor's Office seriously began to consider the theory that Sampson and Placido had intentionally drugged the 15-year-old girl with illegal substances and alcohol to rape her. She probably resisted or was tortured for pleasure, and after the execution, they simply dumped her on the beach promenade, knowing that the teenager in that condition would probably drift into the sea. When the case was reopened, a witness was found who reported that Scarlett had tried to hitchhike around 3 a.m. Apparently, the girl wanted to get to her family, but none of the drivers stopped. She went to a bar on the beach where Sampson and Placido promised to take her along after 5 a.m. when their shift ended. She stayed there to wait for them. It was suspected that Sampson gave the girl a mixture of heavy substances in her drink to sedate her and rape her. The renewed investigations also showed that Sampson was part of a supply chain for illegal substances on the beach, so he always had illegal substances with him. Perhaps it was this connection that initially allowed him to escape justice, as the corrupt authorities did not want to expose what was going on in the resort. Strangely, Placido no longer appeared in the story, and only Samson remained the main villain. Due to friendly relations, however, it was assumed that he might have been the instigator. During the trial, the defendant's lawyer denied Samson's involvement in the murder and insisted that it was an accident. He whitewashed his client's image in every conceivable way, but the police had enough witness statements and evidence to believe that he was involved in the brutal massacre of the teenager. The defense lawyer managed to prove Placido's innocence. He had a lot of contact with Scarlett that night but drove home on his scooter before she wanted to leave with Samson. The list of charges against Placido was reduced to incitement even before the hearing began, whereupon the man was acquitted. The charge was dropped, but Samson awaited a different fate. On July 19, 2019, the Bombay High Court found Samson de Souza guilty on 5 counts, including premeditated murder, rape, inducing a teenager to consume hard substances, and attempting to conceal evidence of a murder. Finally, the hour of truth had come for Fiona. After almost 11 years of relentless struggle, she had achieved justice, but the outcome was anything but expected. Samson was sentenced to only 10 years in prison for the brutal, grievous murder. The sentence seemed too lenient. Nevertheless, considering the circumstances, 55-year-old Fiona was glad that her energy had not been wasted and that the criminal received his deserved punishment after 11 years. Despite the verdict, Samson continued to maintain his innocence. In fact, Fiona fought for more than just justice for her daughter during that time. In the more than 10 years she tried to bring those responsible for her daughter's death to justice, she was scrutinized by both the courts and child protective services, who were very critical of her actions. It was considered to strip Fiona of custody of all her minor children as a negligent mother, but even that was not the family's biggest problem. Even before Halloran's final act, Fiona's eldest son, then 28, was found dead in a homeless shelter after taking a large dose of morphine. Fiona said that her eldest son was very close to Scarlett and never got over the rape and murder of his sister. He had blamed himself all those years for not having traveled to India with his family and for not having managed to protect Scarlett. And now he was also very angry that the murder of his sister had gone unpunished for so long. A big blow to Scarlett's reputation came from Rob, her mother's then boyfriend, who was with the family on that trip. He provided exactly the opposite information that did not match Fiona's statements. According to him, Scarlett had spent all the money on illegal substances and alcohol in the second month of her stay in Goa, whereupon the entire family lived on 1 bowl of rice a day. According to him, Scarlett smoked in front of her mother, sisters, and brothers. He also reported that Julio had almost violently taken Scarlett away a few days later when they were on another beach. He believed that the mother could have received money for her daughter, which is why she left her with Julio and they left. But it all sounded like another rumor that Fiona vigorously denied. If you liked the video, please give it a like, that helps a lot with its spread. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself. In every family there is a black sheep, sometimes a very apt description of the state of affairs. At least it perfectly suits the description of today's story. Judy Anderson did not go to work in the early morning hours of December 26, 2007. She worked with a friend named Linda at the post office. The two women had known each other for years, maintained good contact, and visited each other on weekends. Judy was known as a very responsible employee who never missed a shift without good reason or prior notice. But this day was significantly different from the others. So Linda apologized to management and drove to the Anderson family's house at 9 a.m. to see if everything was all right. She entered the house without realizing she was in mortal danger. Coincidentally, however, no one was there at that time. Upon arriving at the Anderson family home, Linda found that the couple's cars were present, but the house looked empty. No lights were on in the house, and it was too quiet. When the woman went to the front door, she couldn't get in and rang the doorbell. Receiving no answer, she knocked a little harder on the door. At that moment, Linda noticed that the Andersons' house was unlocked. This seemed strange to her as it looked empty from the outside. As she entered the house, she immediately smelled a strange, unpleasant odor. Linda called out for the family, but no one answered. As she walked past the fireplace on the ground floor, the woman saw something suspicious downstairs. As she descended into the darkness, she saw a man lying on the floor and thought he had carbon monoxide poisoning. She wanted to try to pull him upstairs, but as she approached him from the side, she was startled when she saw another body in the darkness of the basement right behind her. She did not have her cell phone with her. Appalled, Linda dialed emergency services from the house phone. She reported that she had found 3 human bodies in the Andersons' house. Police officers arrived at the farm around 9:30 a.m. Apparently, the scale of the tragedy was much greater than Linda had imagined. Scott, his wife, and 2 small children were found in the basement of the house. They had all been killed by gunshots to the head and carelessly piled together. The bodies of the elder Andersons, Judy and Wayne, lay in a barn where the murderers had placed them after the cold-blooded execution. The town of Carnation in Washington state, where this madness unfolded, was considered a quiet, peaceful place. Apart from occasional burglaries, nothing ever happened here except on this fateful day when one of the worst murders in the state's history occurred in Carnation, spoiling the Christmas spirit. While forensic officers worked on the farm around 11 a.m., the daughter of the murdered Judy and Wayne, Michelle, and her boyfriend Joseph arrived and tried to go to their trailer. Naturally, the police officers wanted to speak with them. From the outset, investigators noticed the strange behavior of the young people. Although the crime scene was already cordoned off, something clearly frightening had happened here. Everything was taped off, but neither Michelle nor Joseph asked why this was happening at their parents' farm or why the police were there. They asked no questions about their relatives, as if everything that was going on there was indifferent to them. Naturally, this was strange. Given the suspicious behavior of 29-year-olds Michelle and Joseph, they decided to apprehend them and question them separately at the station. Michelle behaved very confidently and even defiantly from the start. She said that she and Joseph were going to fly to Vegas on December 24 to get married. So both were not in the house at the alleged time of the crime, and they said they had no idea what had happened during that time. However, there were no rings on the lovers' hands nor a marriage certificate. Michelle then justified that they had gotten lost on the way and never reached Las Vegas, so they decided to return, and when they arrived home, they found the police officers. Joseph seemed to be the weak link from the start. Nervously, after a few minutes of interrogation, he confessed to killing the family. He seemed genuinely remorseful. Joseph cried and called himself a monster. The police managed to break Michelle a little later. She also confessed to murdering her family members. The young people agreed to cooperate with the investigation. First and foremost, the investigators expected to obtain the murder weapon. The couple led law enforcement officials to the location where they had hidden 2 pistols. They submerged the evidence in a river near the town. As the couple led the investigators and showed them the exact location, special services began their work. Thanks to a search team of divers, the valuable evidence was recovered from the bottom of the pond and taken to a lab. Ballistic examinations confirmed that these were the weapons used to shoot 6 people who collectively suffered multiple injuries. So what happened to the family, and what was the reason for using the pistols? 60-year-old Wayne was an engineer at the Boeing company. He was born into a good family and spent his younger years on his parents' farm. Wayne was an active and determined man. He strived for a good education and a career, and his dreams began to come true quite quickly. He built a private life. His first relationship was unsuccessful, and the couple quickly separated. Then he met Judy, whom he later called his better half. With her, he succeeded in building a wonderful family that both were rightly proud of. By 2007, the couple had been married for 31 years and lived secluded on their farm. 61-year-old Judy Anderson was focused on family from the start. She dreamed of children and a happy marriage, and Wayne was her opportunity to fulfill all of that. The family home was in the small town of Carnation, just outside Seattle. It was a close-knit community where everyone knew the Anderson family well, maintained friendships, and regularly met with neighbors for joint barbecues. The holiday weekend in December 2007 was to be no exception. The Anderson couple had 3 children in their 30 years together: Mary, Scott, and Michelle. The eldest daughter, Mary, lived at the time in the neighboring town of North Bend. She had moved away from her family and had been living alone for several years to build a career. In her private life, success was more modest. She was sick over the holidays and wanted to visit her family another time when she was well again. Scott was 32 years old at the time of the tragic events. He had a 30-year-old wife, Erica. He devoted a lot of attention to his career, but his private life was also in order. The couple already had children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. The young man lived in another neighboring town, about a half-hour drive from the elder Anderson's house. He was a devoted family man and a loving husband. He worked as a construction worker while Erica took care of the household and the little ones as a housewife. Michelle Anderson was 29 years old. From the moment she was born, she stood out among the couple's other children, mostly not for the good. Even during her school years, she was known as a quarrelsome, contentious child. She could not achieve professional success. Among the Andersons' neighbors and friends, the rumor circulated that Michelle was a problematic family member. However, her siblings supported her until the end, forgiving her difficult character, and the parents continued to hope that Michelle would come to her senses and sooner or later reveal her talents. Michelle was in a relationship several times but without success. Her last boyfriend was 29-year-old Joseph McEnroe. The couple spent about 5 years together. The relationship was quite complicated, but Michelle had not had a longer relationship. Michelle and Joseph met on an online dating website and quickly began to build a relationship, initially a long-distance one. Then the lovers moved in together and began living together. The attempt to rent an apartment was unsuccessful. They had no special training, so they had difficulties with work and money. In 2004, they rented a mobile home, as that was the only way Michelle and Joseph could afford the rent, at least initially. Neighbors who knew them quite well described the couple as outsiders and very lazy. They rarely left their trailer and avoided eye contact with people and social contacts. Even fleeting dialogue seemed to make them uncomfortable. The slightest misunderstanding, e.g., a car parked incorrectly in front of the trailer, would provoke Michelle's anger. She would immediately run out to argue and shout as if she had only been waiting for such an opportunity to assert herself. But there were also a few pronounced oddities. Several people reported that they observed Michelle during her aggressive outbursts when she would rage without apparent reason and then suddenly calm down. Such behavior was alarming. She was even advised to see a psychiatrist. At almost every meeting with strangers, Michelle brought up the topic of money. As a rule, she invented stories that she and her family had a lot of money, but for some reason weren't using it. In reality, both looked unkempt. Many people described the couple as unkempt, indifferent people. They walked around in dirty clothes and didn't care about themselves, so they were usually avoided. Michelle had a firm grip on Joseph. She completely subjugated him and even answered questions for him herself. She called herself the White Crow in her family, emphasizing that despite her marginality, she was too good for the rest of the Andersons. Of course, such behavior could not be good for the warm relationships in the family, and so conflicts repeatedly arose. If Michelle wasn't inventing stories about the Andersons' money, she was telling how badly her parents treated her. She liked to describe in detail how her father beat her from a young age and her mother was a hypocritical tyrant. It was unbearable to live with them, so she moved out and lived her own life. That's how Joseph and Michelle ended up in the trailer. Despite the tensions in the family, neighbors repeatedly saw Judy visit her daughter once a month. Each time she brought full bags of groceries to support her daughter. The woman behaved politely and calmly, was friendly, and did not confirm Michelle's statements about abuse in any way. In return, her daughter was always rude and would yell at her mother despite her kindness and care. One of the couple's friends described the mobile home as an unpleasant place, more for survival than for a fulfilling life. The trailer was in a depressing state. It was very sparsely furnished and most appliances were broken. Several windows were broken and taped up. The tenants had used improvised tinting. Everything was covered with a foil material that let almost no light through. Michelle admitted that the windows were covered with such foil for a specific reason. It prevented outsiders from looking into the dwelling. When asked for the reason for this measure, she replied that the neighbors were spying on them. According to Michelle, there were even several attempts to break into the trailer when the couple was not there. She filed a report with the police, but despite several surveillance cameras near their trailer, nothing could be found. The neighbors doubted that anyone had broken into the trailer, as there was hardly anything there. It seemed that Michelle had made it all up and was trying to draw attention to herself in this way. The relationship with Joseph seemed rather strange. Michelle sincerely considered herself his spiritual guide. Judging by her words, she would show him how to live correctly. Not many people believed that. Apparently, she didn't have enough knowledge, and so the trouble began. First, Michelle lost her job, then Joseph suffered a similar fate. After a few overdue lease payments for the property, the trailer had to move. There was no money for a full-time apartment, and the couple was forced to move back to the Anderson farm where their parents lived. Michelle and Joseph moved and parked the trailer on their parents' farm property, who did not refuse and took the couple in. For Christmas Eve, December 24, 2007, the Anderson family planned a celebration with their loved ones. The parents, 61-year-old Judy and 60-year-old Wayne, decided to gather everyone together. Scott, along with his wife and their two small children, set off for the family home. Only the eldest daughter, Mary, could not be there. While everyone waited for the guests to arrive, Joseph and Michelle remained in their trailer. There was probably another conflict, causing the parents and daughter with her boyfriend to get into an argument. Suddenly, around 4 p.m., they emerged from the trailer, both armed with pistols. Judy was busy wrapping Christmas presents in the backyard and preparing for the guests' arrival. Joseph distracted her with conversation while Michelle slowly approached from behind, gun in hand. All of this was noticed by Wayne, who was reading the newspaper inside the house. The man tried to intervene. Michelle noticed his attempt and shot at her father but missed him, dropping the weapon. Joseph then picked up the weapon and shot the man once in the head. Wayne was dead on the spot. Judy was then shot 3 times. The perpetrators seized the moment, picked up the bodies, and dragged them into a shed behind the house before the noise attracted the attention of the neighbors, who were quite far from the farm. The murderers then removed the blood and cleaned the crime scene. They had less than an hour before their brother and his family arrived. Around 5 p.m., Scott, Erica, and their children, Nathan and Olivia, arrived at their parents' house as arranged. They were ready to celebrate Christmas and were a little surprised when Judy and Wayne did not greet them. This was completely out of character for the caring and responsible parents who were looking forward to their grandchildren. Michelle reassured the guests, telling them that her mother and father had gone grocery shopping and would be back soon. Unsuspectingly, the family entered the living room. They did not even notice that their parents' cars were parked outside the house. There, Joseph confronted them. As soon as 32-year-old brother Scott sat down on the couch, Michelle took a pistol and shot him several times in the head, killing him instantly. The murderer's next target was 30-year-old Erica, but she still had time to react and fled with the children. The bloodthirsty couple missed several shots and then ran out of ammunition. While Michelle and Joseph reloaded their weapons, the young woman managed to lock herself in a room with a landline phone. At 5:13 p.m., she dialed emergency services 911. Unfortunately, Erica did not have time to speak to the dispatcher because Joseph burst into the room just as she reached emergency services. Erica pleaded with him not to kill the children, but the madman shot her in the head. He grabbed the phone and smashed it against the wall. All of this happened before the eyes of the terrified children who clung to the body of their shot mother. 5-year-old Olivia was the next to die. 3-year-old Nathan did not understand what was happening. He picked up the batteries that had fallen out of the broken phone from the floor and offered them to Joseph. Thereupon, he shot the naive child in the face. Erica managed to reach emergency services. Her death scream seemed to have been recorded, and a police patrol was dispatched to investigate. Soon after, a vehicle with police officers drove up to the Andersons' house. They were met by Michelle, who defiantly locked the gate in front of the officers' eyes. Reluctantly, she spoke with the patrol officers, saying everything was fine and refusing to let them into the house. Access to the house could not be granted, so the police officers had to leave the house. After the couple had been arrested, Michelle, in an attempt to justify her bloodthirsty deed, explained that she was angry with her parents and her brother. Scott, she said, owed her a large sum of money and did not want to pay it back. This was due to her repeatedly lending her brother $3,500 over several years. Gradually, a debt of $4,000 had accumulated. She sought an amicable solution with him, but he persistently ignored her demands to repay the debt. When Michelle asked her parents for support in this dispute, they simply ignored her, for which reason she harbored a grudge. Michelle also stated that she had been physically and emotionally abused by her father for years, and her mother began to pressure her to pay rent shortly before the murder. Michelle was outraged. She did not want to pay her parents for her trailer being parked on their farm property. But no one believed her word. All acquaintances of the couple knew that Joseph and Michelle had no money to lend their brother, who earned well and did not need loans, $3,000 to $5,000 each. The existence of a $4,000 debt seemed highly questionable. Nor did anyone believe that the parents, who knew of the couple's financial problems, would have demanded rent from them. The Anderson couple was very hospitable. They welcomed their daughter and her boyfriend, helped them with grocery shopping, and never asked for money. Feeling that no one believed her, 29-year-old Michelle suddenly began to change her statement. Each time, the perpetrator tried to portray herself as the victim. The final version of the motive for the shooting of 6 people was that she was jealous of her brother's success, of the way he had relationships in the family and at work. She was jealous of her parents, but that did not explain the killing of the small children who barely knew what was going on and were not to blame for the couple being so lazy. Michelle said it was an act of mercy on her part. She realized that her nephews would grow up in a cruel world where both parents would be taken from them from an early age, and she did not want to subject the little ones to that. Furthermore, she was annoyed by the crying of the children, in front of whose eyes their parents were shot. In interviews, Michelle readily recounted how she was humiliated and oppressed by her parents, inventing ever-new stories, each more creative than the last. Even the perpetrator's confession on tape lasted more than 2 hours, in which they described in detail who shot whom in what order. On December 28, 2007, Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe were charged with 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The trial dragged on. After 10 months in October 2008, the prosecution decided to seek the death penalty for both perpetrators, which was in force in that state at the time. Given the cold-blooded massacre of adults and young children, it seemed inevitable that the jury would favor the death penalty for both. However, the governor of Washington state rejected it. Behind the high-profile rhetoric and national attention, Michelle expressed her desire to be executed in another interview. She claimed that she was suffering terrible torment and considered the rest of her days behind bars a far more cruel punishment than lethal injection. Despite her wish, the death penalty was not considered. Following the hearings, both criminals were sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without parole. After the change of governor, the question of the death penalty for the couple was revisited. On September 5, 2013, the Washington State Supreme Court overturned the court's decision. Now a new trial was pending. Michelle was so frightened that she immediately announced she was retracting all her previous statements about her desire for the death penalty. In January 2015, Joseph McEnroe appeared in court. His defense claimed their client was forced into the act by Michelle. According to the lawyers, she was a manipulator who methodically brainwashed him and turned him against his family. Furthermore, he had suffered from a mental illness that made him pliable in the hands of a cunning criminal. Joseph's aunt confirmed these statements by describing the young man's childhood as very cruel. He was abused by his own mother. In his defense, Joseph stated that he at least killed his victims quickly so they would not suffer. It is noteworthy that he justified the killing of children in a similar way, calling it a kind of mercy. On March 25, 2015, the jury found Joseph guilty on all counts. During sentencing, the defendant continued to portray himself as a victim of manipulation. He even changed his demeanor, which the prosecutor pointed out, warning that Joseph was trying to manipulate the jury's decision by changing his behavior and even his language. The jury was never able to reach a consensus on imposing the death penalty, so Joseph was again sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for each murder. 8 years after the tragedy, in January 2016, Michelle Anderson again stood trial. The prosecution again decided not to seek the death penalty. The reason for this was the fact that Joseph had already been sentenced to life imprisonment. State law requires equal treatment for criminals with the same degree of culpability, which was the case for Joseph and his girlfriend Michelle. It was decided that it would be inappropriate to demand the death penalty for her. After the verdict, Michelle cried and told the court that she felt great remorse and regretted that she could not undo the crime she had committed. The prosecutor insisted that the only reason for such lyrical digressions was the unwillingness to spend the rest of her days behind bars and the hope for an even milder sentence. The prosecution highlighted the fact that Michelle mentioned financial motives or anything related to money more than 35 times when she tried to explain the reason for her crazy act. It seemed that the main motive for the crime was money, the inheritance and her parents' house, which she intended to obtain. In her heart, Michelle remained the same cruel and bloodthirsty person, and her remorse seemed to be merely a theatrical performance. According to the prosecutor, it is impossible to believe a woman who repeatedly changed her statements and overtly lied. For example, when she accused her family of abuse, no evidence was found during the investigation and questioning of witnesses that such incidents occurred in her life. Michelle quite blatantly tried to defame her relatives, as if the murders were not enough and all this just to make herself look better. New explanations have emerged, with Michelle emphasizing that she hated Erica as much as the others, but her feelings were triggered by the feeling that Erica had taken her brother out of her life. However, their relationship was strained, which means she lied again. Ultimately, the probable reason for the young woman's massacre was banal jealousy. In the trial, the jury heard testimony from 38 witnesses called by the prosecution for 5 weeks. It was largely a repetition of Joseph's trial, who was already serving his sentence. The hearing was more of a formal matter. Among the speakers was also Michelle's older sister, Mary, who miraculously was not at this celebration. Judy and Wayne had gathered the whole family for Christmas, but Mary had fallen ill shortly before. She later thanked fate that she could not attend for health reasons. At the hearing, she stated that it saved her life. Michelle admitted that she had been planning the act against her family for about 2 weeks. The murderers, however, obviously did not shine with intelligence, as they were unable to cover their tracks, dispose of the bodies, or hide the evidence of the crime. The story of getting married in Las Vegas as an alibi, of course, turned out to be a lie and was immediately refuted. Despite tearful confessions, Michelle showed her true colors when it turned out that the verdict had become final. Even probation was out of the question. She became hysterical, yelled at the judge, and threatened to sue him for providing her with bad lawyers. The defendant even demanded in writing that she be released from prison and allowed to seek her own private lawyer. Of course, this was denied. Accusations of violating constitutional rights followed, and the target of her wrath was the judge. Meanwhile, both offenders are in state prisons. It was not only an emotionally difficult and lengthy trial, but also an expensive one. Given the numerous appeals and the resistance of the murderers' defense attorneys, the fight to commute the sentence dragged on for years. Even without the money spent directly on the investigations carried out by the sheriff's office and the state crime lab, prosecutors spent approximately $2 million on the case of the 2 criminals. Joseph's defense cost about $5 million, and Michelle's trial was even more expensive. The only consolation for the people who paid for the work of law enforcement agencies in the couple's case is the fact that these bloodthirsty criminals will never be free again. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with its spread. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care.